there's a therapist up in Sacramento, John Daly's his name, and he got my attention when he talks about the relationship to intoxication with kids, right? So when you're talking, what about the kids who maybe don't have so many underlying problems, but they get high, they like it, and they want to do it again? And focusing on that, sort of without regard to thinking, well, anxiety, depression, everything. Do you experience, or what you're experiencing in your work, do you see kids that they like to get high and they keep doing it?
Yes. Yes, they do. And again, most of the kids that I work with like to get high. And there's not a direct correlation of understanding between underlying issues and getting high. If I ask any one of the boys that I treat, why do you get high? It's because I like it. And because most people are looking for an algorithmic connection. If this, then that. And parents are like this too. If this, then that. We come from a good family. How could we possibly have family problems? Because they're looking for a really glaring, algorithmic, A equals B kind of connection. And so a lot of times, yes, all the kids that I treat want to get high. They like getting high. There's a very, very small percentage who say, I don't like it anymore, but I can't stop doing it. That's a very small percentage. And so we have to meet them where they're at. Okay, why do you like getting high? What does it do for you? This is where motivational interviewing is such a great tool, because we say, okay, tell me what's good about it. Tell me how it helps you. Tell me why you like it. And then we can start to then help them make the connection of what purpose does it serve in their life. And so if it is just simply an adrenaline, sort of reward system procedure, then the science is really helpful, because then we can talk about the reward deficit. The more you use, the more of a deficit you end up in, the more you have to use, right? And then it's not just fun, then it's like, I have to do it, right? And so part of it is psychoeducation is huge, just to say, look, here's the facts. This is what happens in your brain. And I find that it's so helpful in talking with teenagers about just science, just straight up science, because they don't get the concept of recovery very well. The whole, a lot of the whole concept of powerlessness and higher power and turning oneself over, that's a big jump for them. We got to start them somewhere, which is, let's just look at what's happening on a cellular level for you. Or let's look at what's happening to your testosterone count and, why you're not getting along so well with the ladies, whatever it is, so.
I've recently put together a PowerPoint on the drop in perception of harm simultaneously while the potency goes up. And I was shocked to see the data on 6th grade onset from 07 to 11 increased 428%. So that trend line is alarming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you put that same data onto something like Xanax, for example, there would be a public outcry. We'd be shutting down the pharmaceutical industry. There would be rallies and marches, right? They're killing our children. But there's that perception that the risk isn't as bad. We don't have the same response to it. And I have parents who say to me, well, he's just smoking weed a couple of times a day. And I said, if your son was drinking alcohol at the same rate that he was smoking weed, would we be having this conversation? Oh, no, that's different. No, it's not really. So yeah, again, part of it is that the data we're seeing is that the use is going up exponentially and the perception of risk is going down conversely, and it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and it shifted right when they put medical in front of the word marijuana.
Yeah.
And now, recreational and legal.
Jennifer, if you present that information to parents like from the 60s, like I was, and how many times do you have to tell them the difference between the potency before they actually take action based on that information? Because I'm guessing it's not just once.
Well, and it doesn't take that long for them to look at it, because a lot of it is that there's just an absence of knowledge. They're operating on old data, right? And I like to use the metaphor of like operating systems for computers. I'm big on metaphors, it drives people nuts. But I say, okay, so you guys are like a Commodore 64, and your kid is like, a Mac, and it's like, you guys have got to upgrade your operating system. And because a lot of our parents are operating with old information, outdated information. And so part of what I find to be so helpful is just to say, look, here's what it is now. Now I get it the way it was when you were smoking weed. It wasn't dangerous, really. All things considered, it was pretty benign. It isn't benign anymore, right? And so part of it means for some parents, it's difficult for them to understand it. I find the parents that have the most resistance to it are the parents who they themselves are using cannabis and they don't want to look at their own stuff. So it's easier to deny the truth because if they start to look at it, then they have to actually do something about it. And so that's a tide that we swim upstream against quite a bit, is the parents who are unwilling to really look at their own issues. But a lot of the parents find it to be enlightening and frightening, and they had no idea, especially around the vapes and around the extracts. Most parents don't understand what that is. They don't know what to look for. They don't know the impact, and they're not considering that it is this really higher risk version of what they think is safe. So I have to give them the alcohol comparison because they can get that. You know, Bud Light versus Everclear, very different animals, and they can get that. Oh, okay, yeah, no, if my kid was drinking Everclear every day, that would be a problem. You know, if I was drinking Everclear every day, that would be a problem. So.
I really like your informed consumer, which you use a lot with our students, but it's true. I think we've been working with students who have been suspended and for drug use, and they really have no idea what they're doing. Like they really don't know what they're taking. And I was seeing one kid, and he was having a chronic cough. Like, well, you're smoking. It's like smoking a cigarette, but it's weed. It's not like anything you put into your your lungs. And so then he came back proud because now he's doing dabs instead and less of it. And I said, well, the concentration, so it's like, oh, okay. And so now it's like a whole, but it's interesting because when they have the knowledge, they do want to shift and be healthier, but then they're shifting to something else they don't have knowledge of.
Right, right.
But yeah, so I think the psychoeducation at the younger age is really important, especially when they're getting the message. They still have that message of it being healthy, of all the medical uses for it, and then, but now I do see that they realize it's addictive. That's just a shift in the last 2 years. That they're that's starting to get through to them, so I'm hopeful that maybe with more education and stuff, we'll know their concerns and pitfalls.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that it's going to take a while to get sort of the generational cognitive shift. It's going to take a while for that to take effect, and we face an even greater challenge with legalization in this state. We face the same challenges that they're facing in Colorado and in Washington, is that the horse gets out of the barn and then all of a sudden we realize there's a problem and it's a lot harder to get it back in. And so if we can start now, before we are faced with legalization in California, about what it does and how it affects the brain, and make them informed consumers and have them understand the addiction potential and have them understand the physiological ramifications. I mean, most teenagers don't know that there's a cannabis-induced hyperemesis, which means excessive vomiting symptom that they can develop. And, oh my God, my kid's throwing up all the time. He must have stomach flu. No, your kid's throwing up all the time because he's smoking high-potency cannabis and he's developed this emesis syndrome. It's like, yeah, no, you need to look at why this is happening and look at this as a symptom of a larger problem. Did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I was going to ask about with teens, are they, I know you say they can get it anywhere, but do they talk about having medical marijuana cards?
Mm-hmm.
They do?
Yes, that their parents get for them.
Oh.
But
Yes.
they
stay out of trouble.
too.
Yes, so they stay out of trouble.
Yeah. But they like in San Francisco, there's certain doctors who will just sit with you for 5 minutes and they'll get it, and the kids are going themselves and they are not 18. So I don't know how that, I don't know, whatever, but they have. And they're getting it very easily.
Yes, it's really easy to get, and a lot of times we'll find that the best place that kids can get marijuana is from their parents' stash. In all truthfulness, a lot of the kids that I treat say, my dad raids my stash, or I raid my dad's stash, and it's the thing of which we do not speak, right? We know we're doing it. Every time my dad busts me with having weed, it disappears. and dad's out in the garage smoking it. So that especially, and again, I treat kids primarily in Marin County, so that's my wheelhouse. That's where a lot of the kids are getting it, is from their parents, stash, or from their friends' parents. But then I do have kids whose parents are providing them with a medical marijuana card to keep them out of legal trouble. And I had a mom who wanted to bring her son into treatment. She had gotten him a medicinal marijuana card, and then he stopped using responsibly. And then she wanted to admit him to treatment for cannabis dependence. Maybe she needs to come too. But, again, it's that idea of it's okay until it's not okay. I had another family who brought their kid into treatment because they had let him smoke weed just so long as you don't smoke it in the house. Don't smoke it in the house. So he built himself a shed in the backyard because he's an industrious young man. And then his parents freaked out because he wouldn't ever come out of the shed. Well, you said I couldn't smoke in the house, but you didn't say I couldn't smoke in the shed. And so he was basically living in a shed in his backyard. And that was the tipping point for his parents. Not that he was smoking weed, which they had essentially sanctioned, but that he was living in a shed. Like, that was the problem. But again, this is the mixed message: is it's okay, just don't ask, don't tell, until now we're concerned about you. And a lot of times that don't ask, don't tell, or that sanctioning is the parents basically saying, look, okay, fine, just don't drink alcohol, but weed's okay, or whatever it is, whatever the dialogue is. So that happens a lot.
I was wondering if you could talk about what you see in terms of the demand for treatment, and whether or not we really have enough treatment resources in the county, and your parents know about them, especially low-cost, no-cost treatment.
There's not enough. There's not enough resources, both for private or for public-funded families. I think that there's a couple of challenges. I think that adolescent treatment is exceptionally difficult to do because you have to treat the entire family system. And by and large, that is the hardest work as a clinician that you can choose to do, because you can't just treat this one person. It's the beauty of adult treatment is you just get to work with that person. Rarely do you work with the rest of the family. With adolescents, you get the whole package,
I would
right?
actually like to answer, Jennifer, and that is, if we have an adolescent, finding them bed space, even outside the county, is challenging, and we will transfer at 2 in the morning. If we get a bed available, if it's to Alta Bates, it's to UCSF Long, we will fight for that bed, and it is very, very challenging and very difficult. And those are just the hospitalized patients.
Right. Yeah.
Really,
that
that
part
really
I know.
hit
Right.
bottom. So I can't even imagine trying to find treatment for people that are even in those dire straits.
Right.
So there is definitely.
That's why we need more support.
Yeah, the challenge is that there aren't enough programs, there's not enough beds, there's not enough resources, but there's also not enough knowledge, and there's not enough willingness to actually do something. Because that's the challenge, is that I think that there's still, in the Bay Area in particular, I find that we're about 10 or 15 years behind Orange County in our perception of the need for treatment. Because most of the families that I talk to that are most resistant to treatment is because they want to keep it in-house. We don't want to talk about it. We're going to hire a private psychiatrist, a private therapist. We're going to hire a private person. We're going to keep it all in-house because we don't want our neighbors to know. I actually met with a mom from San Francisco who met me in a restaurant outside of her neighborhood to talk to me about her son's substance use problem. And I said, well, why don't you go to an Al-Anon meeting? There's a great Al-Anon meeting in Marin County. It's Saturday morning. There's like 200 parents. It's amazing. She said, oh, no, because I'll see someone I know there. And I said, won't that be great? Because then you'll have this fellowship. You'll have this community of other parents that understand what you're going through. No. Because then they'll talk about me like I talk about them. And that was such an eye-opening experience for me as far as where this sort of treatment glass ceiling exists. Orange County, Southern California, it's so much more embraced and accepted as part of this is a resource that's available to us, and there's not a lot of shame around accessing the resource.
Why? How can we get more like Orange County?
Because Orange County has more casualties, because the trend of substance use in Orange County is opiates.
Right.
If we had kids dying from cannabis overdose in Marin County, you'd bet that we'd be clamoring for more services. But again, there's that perception of risk is low. There's not as many lethalities or any lethalities, or at least we're not associating it as being lethal. Therefore, we have this arbitrary treatment glass ceiling that we have yet to, as a treatment community, to really break through effectively, at least in my experience. Yeah.
So then what kind of drug education are they doing in school now, whether it be middle school, high school?
Well, there's an absence of really good drug education in middle school, which is really where it needs to start. Because by the time, when we got called in to speak to the seniors at a local high school, it's like, it's a little too late at that point, because probably 3/4 of the kids in there had either tried or were currently using substances. So, when we get to like the 9th and 10th grade, we can sort of intervene, really. But really, we need to go earlier, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And again, do the education, do the science, do the signs and symptoms. Teach them to be able to have the dialogue with their parents, right? Empower them to have the dialogue, because otherwise, by the time they get into high school, they already know way more than their parents. They're exposed to way more than their parents think they're exposed to. They don't have the tools available to them to be able to choose not to do it, and they kind of get swept up with the tide.
I think part of the problem we're encountering too is 19 different school districts. You don't have anything being done the same.
Mm-hmm.
I know in our particular area, we have been able to get a drug and alcohol program into the 3 middle schools, or the 3 of the main ones that feed into Redwood. And our hope is to build off of that, because that in itself is proven it does not reduce really the use, but it doesn't mean you don't do it. But what we were able to do is supplement the education with the parent information, not only night, but also information is mailed to them so they can continue the discussion. That's a start. But then from there, my hope is that I will work with Redwood and say, this is what your kids are coming to knowing. Now you need to build on that, because once they get into high school, they really only get it in 9th grade currently in their social issues class, and then nothing else. So there's a real strong need for that to continue throughout.
Well, I was going to add to that. I mean, just this year, in the middle school of our public school district, they had a presentation, and the parents were blown away.
So the parents, these were part of it.
They went and they listened, and they couldn't believe what they were hearing. So it's just beginning, and obviously we need to continue it every year. And then at Redwood, even parents I know with older children already in college didn't know about vapes.
Yeah.
So having Vera Woods come speak was mind blowing for some of those parents. But we're trying hard to get a movement going, but it's just begun. And that just shocks me how many parents have no idea or don't want to know what their parents are saying.
And we do a lot of these parent talks, and unfortunately, they're not well attended.
Because you have to make them about getting your kid into the best college.
Yeah.
And they'll all be there.
Change the title.
Just change the title. And then you're like, and then the subtitle is, and don't do drugs to get there.
Right, exactly.
And you don't introduce the subtitle to
So I was just at a couple of talks at
2 middle schools, and they were much better attended than the high school talks we've had. Really good turnout, so I was hopeful.
Hold on, Donna, please.
Yeah, there's institutional denial. When I first started the youth court, Tam High would give a kid 2 passes on marijuana, and the third they'd do something. And they tell the kid straight up, you only have 1 more chance.
Better become a better criminal. Yeah, I think that the best way for all of us to approach this is to empower the parents to go to the schools, to go to the district, because the schools have a harder time ignoring parents, ignoring their constituents, than they do ignoring people like me, who they say, oh, well, you have a vested interest in this, right? This is your livelihood. Of course you're going to say this. Well, yeah, and what I tell them is, you know what, I'll get a paycheck whether or not I come in and talk to y'all about this. So part of it is the parents are harder to ignore, really, at the end of the day. And so what we have to do is get through to the parents, to empower the parents to be able to speak to what they need, and to provide the parents with this kind of information so that they can say, wow, there is a sense of urgency. There is a need for more education. There is a need for earlier intervention. There is a need for us to get this information out to other parents, to the kids, and not live in this state of denial of it's not a big deal, it's not that dangerous. Again, that's what we have to kind of cut through, because parents who find that this is dangerous, they're going to want resolution, they're going to want answers, they're going to want support, because that's really, again, where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of turning things around on an institutional level. Because again, if the institution thinks it's not a big deal, then everybody else is going to follow suit.
Well, at one time in the whole San Francisco Bay Area, there were 30 different treatment centers for adults. Insurance has played a huge role in decimating that, but even worse for adolescent treatment.
Yes.
Right? So how do you do it in your Wood? Are you successful in getting insurance reimbursement for the whole treatment?
It depends on the insurance. It depends on, because we're out of network, so it depends on the out of network benefits. But we have had some good success in getting, if not a portion, then almost the whole treatment reimbursed. But again, we got to get technical with medical necessity.
Right.
Marijuana, insurance companies don't think it's that dangerous. So we have to start to look at what are some other things that are going on. And although I have had kids come in just strictly for cannabis that have gotten their treatment authorized. But again, it's so contingent upon the insurance company, the mood of the adjuster, the mood of the case manager, the mood of the doc-to-doc who's doing the peer review, all of these X factors that make it really difficult for us to say, yes, you will get ABC amount of money back, from your insurance company. And parents, and I feel so bad for parents, they think, I have the Rolls Royce of insurance companies. They're paying thousands of dollars a month for insurance. And when it comes to substance abuse benefits, they've got almost nothing. And they're incredulous. They say, but I pay all this money for this top of the line health insurance. Yes, and in the fine print it says, we will not cover substance abuse, or if we do, we're going to reimburse at 20% of the daily rate of usual and customary, which rolls out to be about like $1.95 a day reimbursement. So it's really, again, if you're starting to go up the food chain, it goes up into the larger, government agencies and insurance companies, and it's the insurance company. Yeah, and the insurance company is always one step ahead of us in terms of finding ways to deny treatment. First it was, and when I did an adult program, I did utilization review, so I heard this all the time. Have you tried and failed a lower level of care in the last 3 months? That used to be the denial, right? Did you try and fail a lower level of care in the last 3 months? No? Okay, well then you need to go to a lower level of care first and fail, and then maybe you can go to inpatient treatment. Or your facility doesn't meet the requirement for 24-hour nursing, which again, if you're licensed under drug and alcohol licensing, you can't have 24-hour nursing, right? So they automatically put a gate up. Now it's you don't meet medical necessity, our criteria for medical necessity. So they're always putting up roadblocks. As soon as we get over one, they're going to put another roadblock up. And this is true of children. They deny authorization for children because they don't view substance use as a pediatric disease. They view it as a characterological issue, right? And so that's, again, part of this larger tide that we swim against on an insurance level and on the conceptualization of what it is exactly that we're treating.
Well, Jennifer, it seems like an epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, presenting these numbers and how fast the rate is growing. I mean, I understand that you've presented and to the county as a public health director. What else can be done at that level?
Dawn's been doing it a lot longer than I have. I would defer to his expertise.
Like we're addressing suicide as an epidemic, though the numbers are small, it is, but this is, I think Jennifer's case.
There is so much money in marijuana. The Wall Street is lining up behind legalization. I think short of a movement of recovered people and 10-year-olds protecting the future of their own brains is the only thing that can stop it. But I think it's going to take something dramatic to stop it and to turn this, because the amount of money that can be made is enormous. And I'm concerned too. Right now the cartels are making about 40% of their income on marijuana. the other 60% on meth, heroin, and coke. If we dry up their marijuana profits, they're going to flood the market with their other products. So I'm seeing legalization leading to chaos. And we already have cartels adopting Marine County because we're fond of oxy. When you run out of money for oxy, you go into heroin.
Yeah, there's a ripple effect any way you slice it. And I think that the issue around the money, the economics of legalization, which is what they're seeing in Colorado, was the unintended consequence of, what was it, like some hemp con in Denver that was sponsored by Mazda, the car company, right? So last I checked, I didn't go to Mazda for my medical advice, but Mazda is sponsoring a medical marijuana, event, as it were, and there's a lot of money involved, and so part of it is we're essentially in a grassroots kind of movement that's going to take a while to take effect, but unfortunately, we're going to sit back in 5 or 10 years and say, I told you so. And it's unfortunate that we're going to have to do that, but it's going to take that. It's going to take something drastic. It's going to take the public going, whoa, this was not such a great idea. Now what do we do? For us as a treatment community to sit back and say, we told you, we saw this coming, and nobody believed us. And, again, it's not, I won't try to make it sound like this, the sky is falling, but it is to an effect. The sky is falling on our kids. I don't want my 6-year-old to grow up in a community where it's totally fine to poison your brain and it's a socially sanctioned event. I worked hard to grow that brain, right? I certainly don't want her to grow up in a world where it's totally fine to destroy it and everybody's okay with it, right? Again, it's going to take a while for us as a community to be able to have everyone else kind of collectively catch up with where we are.
And for those of us that have worked in treatment for a long time, we're seeing a lot of the population are 20-year-olds. I know at North Bay, you can talk about what you're seeing right now at North Bay.
Yeah, I mean, we have, a lot of young men with cannabis issues who are developing psychosis.
Is that the most frequent thing you see there? Is that substance?
No, it's not the most frequent, but it's one of them.
Dr. Smith always talks about the opiate issues that you guys are seeing. So.
Yeah, there are a lot of opiate issues as well. But, they're all a problem. I mean, there's not a drug that isn't a problem, but we just happen to have a particular client right now who has a serious cannabis issue and psychosis that's not controlled. So he's looking at, mental health, in-hospital mental health for the next 12 months.
We also have a client that came in, so North Bay is a 90-day residential, and then after that we have an extended care, which is another 90-day agreement. When they're doing well, we're helping them kind of slowly step back into their real life, and our particular client is now in extended care, and I remember during his admission he was coming in for a bunch of legal charges that was happening, and the substance he was using was dabs, and that was all he was using, and he had been hospitalized. He had gotten himself he's going through a divorce right now, gotten himself with legal issues, I mean, just the whole gamut. And he wasn't using, heroin or alcohol.
And the fact that it had lowered his inhibitions so much that he was doing things that ended up getting him in serious legal trouble where he might do serious time in jail.
Right.
And all because of this drug and the lack of control over the potency. I mean, I think we should talk about that. I think that's a really big issue. We might not be able to stop it, but how do we stop this potency issue? That's,
Well, it's an industry.
Yeah.
So it's not like you had mentioned grassroots, and we had been at the same conference a couple months ago where there was a talk about this individual worked at a treatment facility in Colorado, and he was giving his personal experience of being a resident of Colorado and how it affects his family. And he was saying that it is the industry that's doing it, marijuana industry and these companies for the dollar, right? And it's not about the grassroots that a lot of the community and people think that it is. It's very different, and it's being marketed to children.
Just
so,
like cigarettes.
Just like the tobacco company,
Yeah. Right.
right? It's the same thing, but it appears, right? People assume that it's different.
Yeah, it's almost the same trajectory of big tobacco that we saw, where doctor prescribes you to smoke cigarettes, right? The old ads where it's like, doctor says to smoke Winston's, right? Because they're the purest cigarette out there, right? And, fast forward, 20, 30 years, and it's like, oh, maybe cigarettes are bad. No, cigarettes aren't bad. Fast forward 10 or 15 more years, oh yeah, cigarettes are bad. Warning labels, cancer, bad, ban smoking everywhere, right? But what took 50, 60 years for that to happen? We're seeing the exact same trajectory with cannabis. It's healthy, doctor prescribed, right? Does it sound familiar, right? Oh, wait, psychosis? Oh, that's not good. Oh, but it's still okay, right? And so we have to wait another 10 or 15 years or 20 years for people to say, wait a second, this is not healthy, this is not good, look at all of these consequences. But, again, it's almost too late at that point.
Sir, what's coming out of Colorado in terms of, it's been a couple of years now, have you been hearing anything like with
Chaos. Yeah,
because that might motivate families as well.
Yeah, I think that the information that's coming out of Colorado is that you're seeing, more emergency room visits, due to cannabis. You're seeing more and more impaired driving charges. You're seeing actually an increase of transportation of non-legal cannabis. And technically in Colorado, it's only legal to smoke in your home that you own, in your private property, right? If you rent an apartment, it's not legal to smoke weed in your apartment because you don't own it, right? But that's the technicality that people aren't talking about. And so there's a lot of great statistics that I can't quote right now, but there's good stuff out there that's coming out of Colorado. Ben Court, who's at Cedar in Denver, does a huge amount of movement. He's amazing. And he does a lot of data gathering and presentations about what's coming out of Colorado kind of in real time. But again, as this data is coming out in real time, it's hard to do anything with data in real time, right? It's almost like you have to amass it to be able to say, here's the collection of information, not here's a study, here's an anecdote, here's some numbers. It's too disorganized right now. We have to be able to amass it so that it has more weight and more breadth.
The advertising that Ben spoke about was also pretty disturbing. The billboards that are geared toward children with cartoon characters and strawberry flavored, and things that just, if we were to start seeing it here in the city, I think everybody would be pretty upset to see how, one of them was some sort of very fluffy cartoon.
It was the Sesame Street characters. There was a dispensary that had all of the Sesame Street characters painted on the side of the building. And PBS ended up sending a cease and desist. They sent a cease and desist letter, but it was too late because there were kids going by say, oh, look, it's Cookie Monster, And so it's like subliminal advertising, essentially. And there's no shame in that, right? It's because it's about building consumers, and it's about building consumers that are younger and younger because they're going to use longer and longer. They're not targeting the occasional person who smokes a joint once a year. They're not targeting that. They're targeting new consumers that they can build a relationship with. Brand alliance. Yeah.
In fact, if you look at the alcohol industry, about 70% of Americans drink. About 70% of the profit margin comes off over 10% who are addicted. The best way to get somebody addicted is to addict them while they're a child. So this industry is going right after our children.
Exactly.
What can we do about it?
Teens, I was just saying too, it's seen as so innocuous, right? And teenagers that have, I see a lot of clients who are talking about psychosis and psychotic breaks. I see clients, at least once a month, a new client will come in with a psychotic break due to cannabis direct. And then they don't want to speak up about it. because there's so much peer pressure in the schools that everyone, you know, these are my friends that are doing this. This is a party culture. If I speak up, I'll all of a sudden be a whistleblower, what have you, or they'll just make fun of me. They won't believe me. And you know, as far as dabs, I'm sure most of everyone in this room knows already, but for those of you who don't, when you, a kid, teenager, they'll have a dab for the first time. If they have a large quantity of it, it's very likely that they'll be cold on the floor, passed out. And so I see a lot of kids that have panic attacks, and they can't move. They're, you know, comatose. So they're locked in a party for hours and having a panic attack, and their friends are dancing around and joking around, you know. So it's mix that with true psychotic break, and you know, it's not an innocuous drug as we're talking about.
Well, one positive thing we could all do in Marin County is encourage the Tamalpais Union High School District Board to support these wellness centers. Now, Redwood has just started one this year, and just in the first few months, 150 kids have come to that wellness center for service. That is phenomenal. I mean, that's off the charts in terms of utilization. But now they're running into budget problems. And so there's serious doubt whether they're going to continue to fund them as they had originally planned to Tam and to Drake. So that decision hasn't been made yet. So even just as a citizen expressing your opinion, contacting them and urging them to support the funding would be a positive step.
So there's a demand, and now they feel like they need to cut off the funding because there's a demand.
Well, there's a lot of variables to it.
Yeah.
There's other variables, but there's always funding issues, right? But
There's priority issues.
well,
The superintendent is new, he needs to hear that people care and they want the wellness center in the school.
And
I've met with the superintendent, and he's identified that schools aren't very good with this issue, and it should be handled somewhere else.
Oh, great.
And the unfortunate thing is that, when I did the social issues training, I said to these teachers, you spend more time with these kids than their parents do. It has to happen in schools, right? Your kid is in school, 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, right? They're not spending that much time with their parents. Even if they have good relationships with their parents, just by virtue of the workload, they're not spending much time with their parents. So teachers, counselors, administrators, they have way more face time with kids, right? That's where it has to happen because that's where the audience is captive.
I think it's also important that it happens with an audience. Speaking to your kid one-on-one, they don't hear you, but if it's done in a group with their peers, and sometimes by their peers, I know Tam would have the peers speak to the kids and the parents. And I think it has to be in more of a group setting as opposed to just a one-on-one with a parent.
But to that point, the kids don't always have the correct information like this.
Oh, no, I don't,
These
yes.
are trained kids.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's the tricky part is making sure that happens and that trained, evidence-based.
So for our drug education, which we bring Jennifer in to speak and Jason, and we have them, we do a presentation over 3 weeks maybe? 2 weeks. But we have our own 2 weeks with you guys. We also have our own students speak, and they bring in younger as well, so that our students are hearing first these anecdotal stories from their younger peers in recovery. Once it was a student at our school, which was wonderful as well. And then it's followed up with Jennifer and Jason talking the next week really about the science behind it and everything like that. And it seems to be a really wonderful combination. And then we offer to our freshmen, Jennifer comes in, to parents, we make it mandatory for parents to go. And so then there's this parent piece as well. So we're trying to sort of reach all of them and it's working for us.
Yeah, we created that to all, I bring in the young student panels and they talk to the kids about their experience, strength, and hope. And we do what's called an ask a basket where the kids ask anonymous questions. Because when I ask for questions from the floor, it's crickets. And we get great questions, which I share with the teachers. And then during those days that they bring up, because they talk about blackouts, and then Jennifer and Jason come in and explain exactly what that is. And then they go home and the parents hear, what they've been talking about, and then we have a parent education evening. So it's about 3 different presentations that we do.
Do you do that in 9th, 10th, and through all through high school? Or do you do that
We do ninth grade and 10th grade. Our 10th graders get a wellness class that they have to take, and in that is a large section in drug and alcohol, and that's when they come in. And then, so it's like 2 weeks of Muirwood presentations, but then the teachers also will focus on it, and then we can deal with the whole social aspect of it, family aspect of it, and then jump into like different drugs and things like that.
And I do want to give a shout out to St. Ignatius because they really let us come in and just do what we know what we're doing. They don't give us any, because a lot of times with the public schools, they'll tell us what we can and cannot say, and then we'll say something and then I'll hear about it later. But with St. Ignatius, they've really given us their freedom to build this program because we have to, you know, figure out what's working, what's not working, and they've been so supportive with us. And thank you.
Do you require parents to attend? I mean, how do you get parents to
We
attend?
say, so for freshmen, it's called, it was originally, we're changing the name now because we're changing it a little bit, but originally I think it was based off a program called Community of Concern, and so someone else who worked at St. Ignatius was a member of that, and so he had that night, and it was a mandatory night for freshman parents. It has evolved, and so now we have Jennifer speak, we have a current psych teacher do a presentation, speak a little bit, and then we have a panel with students, and now I'm doing parents as well. So I'm doing students speaking about what is really going on in high school. So these freshman parents here are like, no, this is actually happening, and this is what your kids will be seeing. And then parents talking about how they navigate it. So like, how do you navigate knowing, you know, your child is going to a party and this and this. So it'd be like parent of upperclassmen. The parents is a new piece that I'm doing this year, so I don't know. I'll let you know how it goes.
But you start with requiring parents of ninth graders.
But the thing is also, it's mandatory, but it's not like anything happens if they don't go, but it's a large turnout, right?
Yeah, I think we had like 400 people last night. Well, and I think the beauty of the model that SI has, which I think a lot of other schools can learn from, is that they build a curriculum around what we're teaching. So the kids actually have a vested interest in listening because they have to essentially write a report on it. And so we have crafted our presentation knowing that they have these, was it 6 points, what is it?
Oh, dimensions.
Six dimensions of wellness. No, it's beautiful. It's brilliant. I love it. The
Very
6 dimensions of wellness that they have to listen for because they're going to be asked about it or have to write about it later. And so they're really focused on what we're saying because they want to get a good grade. Okay, that's the currency in which we can trade with them.
It's a pass-fail. We had to add the pass plus to really get them.
Yeah, but they pay. I mean, these kids. I mean, we have like what 500 kids that we talk to, and every single group. So over the course of 2 days, we talked to 500 kids, and they were all paying good attention. They asked incredible questions. I had one kid who asked a question about naltrexone. Like a 15-year-old asking me about what I thought about naltrexone, and I was like, you want to be my boss? Like, how do you know this at 15? Yeah, likely there's a parent at home that's dealing with something like that, and so it's a great way to engage them. They get a payout because they get a grade, and that's what's important. But then they're integrating this information and they're taking it home versus just sitting, you know, staring at the ceiling for an hour and then going on about their day. So I think it's a brilliant way of capturing the audience, and so far I think it's been really successful.
Well, and it's the message that the school is giving the students that their emotional, social health is just as important as their academic. You know, like it should be such a huge part of. And that's another piece, the underlying anxiety of the Teen Screen program that I run. I mean, the anxiety is through the roof with these students. And so what is their drug of choice? Either they're buying ADHD medication to improve their performance because they're stressed out about getting to college, or they want the drug that's going to numb them out and they can completely check out from all the stress from the academics. Right, so it's sort of this, you know, the message to school, and, you know, parents jump on board because it's so competitive. But it is the academic stress in their lives, a huge piece of wanting to numb out. You know, it was more recreational. I kind of remember in my day, kids were doing drugs to sort of have fun and maybe escape a little bit. Now it's just this intense, really wanting to check out.
Well, I was going to say at the public high school, going back to the wellness center, that's at Redwood, that's what they're trying to, that's the message they're sending to the kids, that your emotional health is just as important. And we're here to help you with that, deal with that stress that you're under, because that is what they hear overwhelmingly. The kids feel it's a pressure cooker, and I'm sure that's all the schools, public and private. But once again, that's the beauty of this wellness center, and it's, to me, unbelievable that funding is going to be cut for it. So.
One thing I'd like to touch on, have people read the Newsom Blue Ribbon Report on marijuana policy? Our lieutenant governor has adopted pro-marijuana to run for governor and ultimately president, because he sees that as a horse he can ride in the White House. And it's quite alarming, but there's some interesting things in there that are useful for us as practitioners. But I was very disappointed to see Tim Chermak comment in there that the psychosis will double, and of course it'll destroy thousands of families, but it won't be enough to change the outcome of the election. And I think being that close to power, and power being that close to money, really makes smart people stupid. I was crushed by that comment.
Yeah, and I think that it's sort of like, do we want to change policy based on a hypothetical? Because there's always the yeah, but, or yes, it could do this, but there's no guarantee, right? And so unless you can show me a guarantee that this is going to net this result, maybe it won't, right? I'll take my chances. And especially if you're taking your chances and there's all of this financial and political backing behind it, the small voice that's saying, yeah, but even if there's a 40% chance that this is going to happen, isn't that enough, right? Isn't it enough that there's going to be exponentially higher rates of psychosis in children as a result? Isn't that a problem?
And the way this report tries to justify going along is, we can get some money to help kids.
Yeah. They always talk about
So
that
that's
we're gonna
right.
funnel all this money into treatment, but it's not happening in Colorado. The money is not funneling into treatment in Colorado. The money is not funneling into early intervention in Colorado. You know, and so it's the rhetoric of getting things passed. It's the same thing as with the lottery in the school system, right? The lottery is going to funnel all this money into the school system, and yet here we are shuttering schools left and right. And so it's the same argument, but again, we don't see it, or the vast majority of people can't see it, choose not to see it. It's too complicated. I'm too busy trying to deal with my own life, much less to deal with all this other stuff. And it only becomes important when it becomes your life, when it becomes your kid, when it becomes your family that's blown apart by it. Then you pay attention. But until then, it's not my problem, it's not my kid, I've got bigger fish to fry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then when it does come and sit to roost in your lap, then all of a sudden we're up in arms about it and we want to make policy change. But it's, you know, it's unfortunate because that's the way things happen, and something catastrophic has to happen because we can't be proactive about it and say, yes, there's this opportunity for this bad thing to happen, so we're going to be proactive about it. We're going to get out in front of it, and we're going to mitigate the blast radius. No, we're just going to hope for the best. And unfortunately, not to get too political, but we as the American public have had that happen too many times, and we have yet to actually learn that if we're proactive, we can reduce the blast radius, we can reduce the damage, but there's too many people that are pushing the movement forward that those of us that want to be proactive are the minority, so.
But Jennifer, there's even further fallout because as more and more users approach these high densities, they're going to be having children, and that's unfortunately what I see, albeit withdrawal is a very high percentage in Martin County because we do have treatment centers, and there have already been studies showing that during embryogenesis, that there's big carcinogens and teratogens in marijuana, and that fallout here hasn't even been discussed, but once it's legalized, we're going to start seeing future generations affected by just being born to addictive parents.
Right.
That's really bad.
Well, and we're looking at, you know, neural tube damage and, you know, all of the different, you know, prenatal impacts that it has. Again, there's so many far-reaching consequences that we haven't even begun to really be able to wrap our heads around, but
Yeah, and isn't it ironic, I heard somebody speak and say something about this country wanting, we do everything right to get ahead, the academic pressure, to be a better country in science and math, but then let's kill our teens' brains with the legalizing marijuana, like, so, such a conflict.
But I think that in general, and it's always good to have these kind of roundtable discussions about it, because I think for me, it validates that we're all seeing the same thing, and we're all, trying to kind of unite around the issue, because it can be very isolating, all of us in our various camps trying to do what we can do individually, right? We're all in our various little trenches, but all of those little trenches lead to the same place. And that's why it's so important for all of us to continue to collaborate, continue to talk to one another and support each other. Even though we're coming from different trenches, we're all, again, funneling into the same arena. And so that's how we can really use this data. What you've heard tonight, you can take it out and share it with somebody else. You can start the dialogue with someone that you maybe previously couldn't have the dialogue with. You can start to arm your kids and your kids' friends and your students and your clients. You can arm them with this data so that we can at least sort of have that grassroots movement move out a little bit farther. And again, just education is key, right? That's true of anything. So education is key. And to take the politics and the personal stuff and the emotion out of it for a minute, right? Because that's where we can get stuck in the rabbit hole. Let's just look at the facts, right? Can't argue with science. If it works with teenagers, it has to work with grown-ups, right? Just stick to the facts and stick to the science. And the science is there, and the science is compelling. And it's interesting, and it's hard to argue with it. And so I'm going to pull us to a close, because you guys have been so amazingly great with your commentary and the dialogue, and I just really appreciate you guys coming out tonight. I do have copies of the studies that I cited. If you're interested, the one that came out of England and also the New Zealand study, so I have copies of those available if you want to take those with you. And again, I just really appreciate your support, not only of the treatment community, but of Muir Wood and of North Bay. It's really helpful for us to know that, we're all out there fighting the same fight, and it's just really helpful to have all of you here participating in this discussion. So I just want to thank you all so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.